So, hello everyone, and thank you for taking time to join this session. So, here's what we'll be covering. So, API and digital transformation, how API has evolved over time. The black box for API implementation, the unknowns of unknowns, and how shift-left observability is going to enable us to know that, right? And then there are two personas that we concentrate today. One is the DevOps persona, and another is the line of business perspective. And finally, I'll also touch upon how Site 24/7 helps in that observability space. To start with, a bit of history on API transformation itself. Previously, it exists in terms of organizing native code, a way to consume common data models. Then the client-server architecture came into focus, and then if you look forward, then Web 2.0 came into place, and then early cloud adoption, multi-location data centers were born, and then public cloud adoption were brought in, and then finally, hybrid cloud. That's how the world is today, right? So from a monolithic architecture early on to multi-services or microservices architecture that's prevalent today, right? So we believe software is a craft, an art that requires diligent study, okay, innovation and constant refinement, right? So you need to feel and appreciate the nuances of it, take care of and nurture it, right? That's how software is built, and API build or API development is very much part of that. So if you take the applications of APIs, right, so it's going to be endless, be it mobile, be it legacy communications between legacy systems and modern communication systems, partner interactions, aiding data interactions to deploying infra now, on the cloud. So API plays a very vital role. So how did this happen? So if you know, as you all know, right, the digital transformation, the buzzword, if you can call it. So 89% of companies have adopted digital first strategy, right? Another survey from Forbes, the same survey from Forbes says that companies have believed that cloud technology is critical to digital transformation. That's 86% of them that says that. And 84% of them says that companies have actually prioritized mobile customer experience. And 87% of the companies think digital will disrupt their own industry. It's already disrupting, and it will disrupt further as well. So 78% of consumers use a mobile device to connect with the brand, right? So be it a consumer brand or be it a B2B brand. So both consumers are now connecting with the mobile, right? And so 83% of workloads are now shifting or migrating to the cloud. So like the evolution of the API, right? Traditional infrastructure looked like this. So we had the data center, network, storage, virtualization, then on top of that, OS, middle layer, and right up to the functions that are written, right? So that's how the evolution of traditional on-premise IT was formed. And then data centers took over. Multi-location data centers were brought in. So during the time of 2006, when actually AWS was born, you see these were all outsourced, but they were made into a service, right? So data centers, the network, storage, and servers all were managed. And then virtualization was built on top of that, right? And Now, if you see IaaS, this is what it looks like. So all these layers were abstracted. And we now concentrate only on this middle layer, the data layer, application, and the function that's written on top of that. And now, PaaS was formed, right? So even the applications were brought in as a service. And then another abstraction, only the business logic, the business servers, the application servers, and the logic came into focus. And if you take now, even the application is abstracted. Even that has now come into a service. So if you take AWS, Azure, or Google, all provide their own application layer itself on top of the data layer, the storage, and all the app pools that go around it, right? So basically, you just need to write the business logic, right? And this is how serverless exists today. And now even serverless is now, brought into a platform where SaaS is now the full-fledged platform, right? So you write basically, you don't need to write actual code, but you just need to communicate with all these services that are underneath, right? So you communicate with your partner, or you communicate with your payment gateway. So those are all underneath, and you just present that to your end customer as a full-fledged solution. That's how SaaS is being played today. So traditionally, from the known, that you know something that is already existing, that you have control over it, to the unknown, right? So you don't have a lot of control for all these layers that you are actually using it. So you might use that as an API, right? But you don't know when that API is going to fail, or when that's, you trust that you basically know that you have things in place, you have compliance in place, but then there is still an unknown, right? So there is now you can go even further, since it's going to be SaaS, from unknowns to unknowns, right? Unknown of unknowns. That's a lot of black box that's existing there. So how do we get to know that unknown, right? So that's when you have to have a shift left strategy in your SDLC itself, in your software development lifecycle, from a traditional approach where you get to monitor whatever your known is, to understand what your unknown is going to be, right? That's when you have to shift left. So I'm just going to concentrate on two personas, one from the IT perspective, the DevOps or the SREs, and another is the line of business owners, right? So the end business owners who will need those observability data. So a little bit of what or who DevOps is. So DevOps are engineers who take care of the performance of the application. If you see here, this is almost like a split personality, right? So there's a developer and an operation engineer. So they take care of the code quality. If there are any errors in code, that's the DevOps job. And end user analytics is very important. Application performance is very important. And proactively to fix the problems before the customers complain, and so on. So, and also we have a tab on the deployments that take place and its aftermath. And you can also add, when you add a security layer on top of that, that's the new segment, DevSecOps. Right, so some of the observability use cases that DevOps need to ensure that the deployment's performance for previous and current deployment performance comparison is right there, so that any new deployments that's happening, that if that's failing, if there's a performance problem analysis, then you guys have to revert that back, right? So that needs some form of observability that for you. And also deployment success rate, telemetry, meaning you actually deploy a lot of versions or endpoints that you actually develop on a daily basis. You add more features to it, but then you'll have to need that success telemetry to actually measure if that is actually going right or wrong. And also, consistent developer experience. So if you have to be ensure that your APIs don't break in different versions, and you have consistent response time to the consumer of your API, right? So that's one of those use cases where you need observability, and also you basic continuous health of your API itself. It should not break. And how do you do that? You have to continuously test and monitor in every stage of your release process. So from testing, from staging, from pre and the production, right? So in every stage, you need that observability, visibility to ensure that your API is working as expected. And there's also a security dashboard, threat dashboard, where, for example, there's an OWASP API top 10 security threat where excessive data in your API should not be exposed. So that's a measure that you have to have in place, right? So that you have to comply to the security standards of your organization and your customers as well. So a different perspective of use case where observability is going to be used is the line of owners, personas who are going to use your use the observability as a measuring scale. So for example, you build a e-commerce site and your payments are not successful, right? So how many payments were not successful actually determines your revenue directly. That has to be a measure of observability that takes place in that space. And for example, your e-commerce site, there is a lot of out-of-stock components. So products that go out of stock, and you want to know how many out-of-stock products were actually seen by the customers. Why? Because there is a potential that these products will be bought. Right, so you go back to the vendor, or you go back, you return your API response to your vendor saying that you're out of stock, and that vendor has to purchase, and that full transaction has to be traced, and that's an observability need, right? So that determines the actual business KPI. So another use case is anomaly in the total request that the APIs hit. For example, let's say your per day API call is a million request count, but suddenly your API requests drop, right? So that's an anomaly. But even if it's on a Saturday or a Sunday, it's generally going to drop, right? If you're using a business API, and your weekdays are going to be up and running. So that seasonality will be taken into account. That total requests that are hit for your APIs actually has to be in sync with your business KPI threshold. So another example is requests to external services that fail. So again, for example, if you are using a payment gateway and that request is failing, that as a consumer of that API, so that's a definite observability or use case that you need to have. And so another one is top customers who use your APIs, and another is region-based API consumption. Right? These are all some of the use cases that line of business owners will need as from an observability solution. So these are some of these shift-left strategies that you actually need to ensure that you have your APIs on top of the game, and your APIs are performant, and you can also take business decisions based on that. So this actually helps correlate the end system KPIs with your business outcomes. So let me just talk about the 3 pillars of observability and why it's needed. So I'm sure most of you would know that the 3 pillars of observability are metrics, traces, and logs, log injection. So this is kind of a distributed tracing microservice architecture that's common in today's world. So there are different services that interact with each other, and it uses different coding languages like Java or Node.js or .NET or whatever, right? So, and it's built on top of containers and serverless functions. So if you take log, there are n number of logs that can be ingested into your system through microservices, and all that needs is real-time data processing, and it has to come through one single platform so that it can be correlated and it can be troubleshooted. So you need to know basically who did it, where, and what, and when the problems or the deployments took place, and where the performance bottlenecks were. Okay, so in today's world, see, this observability for API stack consumes in terms of metrics, traces, and logs. So we need to have an observability platform where these can be come to rescuing us. So how do we do that? So if everything is in one single place, there is a lot of data that is involved, and on top of that, if you build an AI platform on top of that, that's going to help us drill down the correlation between the events that are happening, and also it's going to bring down the MTTR, that's the mean time to response for an incident that can occur. Okay, so Site 24/7 is a monitoring solution. It's an observability platform that lets you take care of your monitoring needs from your single console. We have website monitoring or REST API monitoring, servers, the cloud, network monitoring, APM Insight as a solution, real user monitoring as a solution, and app logs ingestion from different data sources. So we are here for 15 years in the market, 15 plus years in the market. And then we have a global footprint where we have more than 10 data centers across the globe, in US, in Europe, China, India, and Australia. So we are security compliant, SOC 2 compliant, GDPR compliant as well. So let me just talk to you about how the consumer can use, as a consumer of the API, right? So what he needs to monitor. We are just talking about one segment of the whole SDLC process, that's testing and monitoring, right? So this itself is a large space, and how the consumer is going to use that. So if you take REST API as a monitoring, how do you monitor your REST API from an end user? The end user is actually the consumer of your API. So you actually basically track the performance and the availability of that API. So you need to ensure that it has a global presence. So for example, your APIs can work in US, but it can fail in a EU region. That failure, how do you do that, right? So you will have to have global locations all over the globe that actually can do that for you. And that's when Site 24/7 as a product can help you. So also you need to basically stay on top of your downtime. Basically you'll have, the APIs should be consistent, they have to be available, and your SSLs have to work correctly. It has to be certified. Your domains should not expire. And these are basic things, but a lot of people, a lot of companies actually oversee this, right? So also you need to have the transaction itself, right? So REST API can have one endpoint, and that response will trigger another endpoint, and so on. chain of transaction that happens, and that itself has to happen from checked from different global locations, right? So that's another scenario for the consumer. So how do we do that? So we have content checks that's available. So basically, you can give an expression, you can give a JSON path expression that you can actually give for your endpoint, your expected response that you have, or in either as a response itself or as a header. So once that JSON expression that you give fails, you know that that's a problem. So Site 24/7 automatically sends you alerts through email, SMS, voice, third-party integrations like Slack, like Teams, channels, and also like two ITSM tools. Like, so for example, PagerDuty or ServiceNow. So you get a lot of alerts. You get these alerts that are generated by a threshold breach, right? So you can also do this param forwarding, where if you don't expect the param that is actually going to be there, you'll get a notification. And then we also have GraphQL support, so that when that exact GraphQL syntax is not matched, you actually get an alert for it. So this gives you a performance overview of a performance of your API itself. And the events timeline actually says that what are the times in which your events in which your threshold is breached. Right? So right from the So right from the consumer's perspective to the creator's perspective, right? So the creator's perspective, I mean here is the servers, the application servers, and the application code itself. So there, your API how is the API performing at the back end? How is the API performing in your application layer, in your WSO2 or in your actual application code where you are written your code in, let's say for Java Tomcat server, what are the components that are involved? What are the SQL queries that are involved? So what are the caching mechanism, Redis, what are the keys that are actually taking more time, and hence your response time for your API is high, right? So those kind of in-depth details is offered from Site 24/7 as an APM solution. So this is the creator perspective. So right down to your line of code. So if you see here, there's a stack trace that is generated automatically through instrumentation for that particular transaction, your REST API transaction. And then if you see there, there's a memcache call, there's a Cassandra call, and there are a lot of other filters and functions, custom functions that are involved in that particular transaction. And if you can see on the right side, you actually see the time taken for each of those function calls or the method calls that are taking place. And in a distributed architecture, your distributed services that are actually consuming those time. So in a particular transaction, you might just click buy button in your e-commerce app, but at the back end, there's going to be a payment gateway, there's going to be invoices generated, and all those things are going to go through this transactional pipeline, and then the back end of that, right? So you need to have the response time. What's the external factor that is failing, or the external endpoint that is consuming a lot of time. So you need to know that endpoint transactions, response time, or where that fails, or where that's consuming more time. So that distributed tracing mechanism is also available as part of your trace itself, right? So this is just an example of how this is done and how it's shown in our UI. And if you take the logs itself, right, there's going to be a lot of logs that are generated from your application layer and your system layer. And you can drill down and you can query these logs and with R support, with sorting support. So we can basically digest or ingest any type of log into your into Site 24/7, and that's going to help you, get what you want, or get the analytics from the logs what you want. And yeah, so this is a distinct log. And to just sum it up, yeah, so digital transformation augments the need for observations, and observation demands observability. Observability injects data-driven metrics. Metrics need continuous monitoring, and monitoring invites operations. Operation merges with development, and development is code. So key takeaways: complex and modern applications drive new age API development. This demands visibility at every aspect of SDLC. Shift left observability for DevOps and line of business help find unknown proactively, and Site 24/7's all-in-one observability platform aid to achieve that end-to-end observability. So thank you. So we are at I'm there, and our folks are there as well. So you get a chance to win Bose AirPods at the end of tomorrow. So please come by. We'll have a chat, and thank you.